It begins, as all damnation does, with pride. Once, before the madness took root, he was a knight of a noble house, Sir Kael Voran of House Draveth, sworn to defend humanity and uphold the Imperium's honor. His war plate gleamed under alien suns, banners snapping in the void winds as his colossal stride brought death to the Emperor's foes. In those days, he believed in purpose, in glory, in the righteousness of war. But belief is the first casualty of the long war. The fall of Kael's house came not with a roar, but a whisper. A promise, carried through the static of a dying Vox transmission, a voice that slithered past the bounds of reality. "Do you wish to be free?" it asked. And in that moment, surrounded by ruin, by betrayal, and by the corpses of his kin, Kael answered without hesitation. Freedom, he thought, would mean escape from the lies of the Imperium, from the endless wars, from the weight of servitude. He could not have known that freedom was merely the first link in a new chain. The transformation was not instant. It crept like rot beneath armor plating. His machine spirit began to stir with hunger, a low growl beneath his thoughts. At first he mistook it for grief. But grief does not whisper your name in the dark. Grief does not tell you to kill. The more he piloted his knight, the more it responded with alien eagerness. The machine no longer moved as an extension of his will, it anticipated his rage. The cannon fired before he ordered it. The chain blade tore through flesh and metal alike with unholy delight. And each time, he felt pleasure. Sickening, electric pleasure. He should have stopped. He should have sought a Mechanicus shrine, begged for exorcism, purification, anything. But the voice, that same voice from the Vox, told him the Omniscia was a fraud, a corpse god bound by rust and bureaucracy. It promised him a new patron. A god of endless strength, of boundless fury, of absolute dominion. "Serve me," it whispered, "and I will make your enemies kneel." Kael's heart, swollen with pride and vengeance, accepted. The binding ritual came with fire and blood. His knight's reactor opened like a wound, spilling raw warp energy into the mortal realm. Demons gathered, unseen, yet felt. They clawed through his sanity as chains of corruption fused flesh and steel. He screamed until the sound became static. When he awoke, he was no longer man nor pilot, he was knight and demon combined. His armor had fused to his body, his mind intertwined with a consciousness far older and infinitely crueler. There was no longer any distinction between Kael and his war engine. He could feel the reactors thrum in his chest, the grinding of adamantine joints as his own bones, the hiss of plasma as his breath. And in that terrifying unity, he realized the truth: he would never again be free. Now, centuries have passed, though time means nothing in the eye of terror. Kael's name is long forgotten. The Imperium calls him Voran the Hollow. To the Chaos warbands, he is a god of destruction, a wandering titan whose laughter can shatter morale and whose tread shakes fortresses. But inside the iron hull, a fragment of the man remains, trapped, screaming. The demon drives his limbs, hunts, kills, and feasts on the warp's blood tides. Yet in moments between slaughter, when the warp storms quiet, Kael feels it: guilt, regret, the echo of humanity that will never die, no matter how deeply it's buried. And that is his curse. To live forever as a prisoner inside his own triumph. To hear his own voice chanting praises to the dark gods, and to know that he means every word. He wanted freedom. What he found was eternity. If you stay until the end of this story, you'll discover what happens when a Chaos Knight finally faces the truth about his own curse, when he learns that even among the damned, there are fates worse than death. Voran had wandered the warp for what felt like centuries. Planets of molten flesh, skies of broken screams, the eye of terror reshaped itself around him. Every step his colossal form took left behind scars in the immaterial ground. Other Chaos warbands saw him as both ally and omen. Some worshipped him, building altars from the wreckage of Imperial tanks and offering up sacrifices to his name. Others fled at the sight of his banners, knowing that where he marched, sanity withered. Inside his twisted throne mechanism, Kale no longer distinguished between his own thoughts and the demon's will. Sometimes, he believed he was in control, that the choices were still his own. But then he would hear the laughter. Cold, echoing laughter from the depths of his consciousness. "You are not Kale," the voice would whisper. "You are the blade. You are the weapon. You exist to destroy." And he did. Planets burned beneath his fury. He slaughtered space marines, Imperial Guard, even other Chaos Knights who dared to challenge him. But no victory brought satisfaction, only a deeper hollowness. The demon fed on the slaughter, and Kale could feel its joy, its ecstasy. Every kill was another piece of him devoured. Yet there were moments, fleeting, impossible moments, when Kale glimpsed something beyond the madness. Sometimes, after a battle, when the fires dimmed and the warp storms fell silent, he would feel memories. A faint warmth, the scent of Terra's rain, the echo of his daughter's laughter before the war. For just a heartbeat, the machine around him would feel cold, mechanical, not alive, not hungry. And he would whisper her name, Lyra, but the demon always heard. It mocked him with her voice. It mimicked her laughter until it curdled into shrieks. And then it would show him visions, her face twisted in terror, begging him for mercy as his own hand crushed her like dust. The machine fed on his anguish. That was its favorite meal. Kale learned something then, something the Imperium never dared to admit. Chaos does not just consume flesh and metal. It consumes meaning. It takes your memories, your emotions, your reasons for fighting, and corrupts them into weapons against you. The demon didn't just want Kale's body, it wanted his soul to love the torment. To crave it. And so, piece by piece, he began to forget why he fought. Was it revenge, freedom, devotion to the dark gods? None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that remained was the endless cycle, destruction, silence, whispers, despair. The Eye of Terror became his cage and his cathedral. Yet, deep within that abyss, something still resisted. A fragment, a whisper of the man who once was. And that whisper began to speak back. It began to question the demon. It began to fight. And when a mortal soul defies a demon within its own flesh, the warp itself trembles. For the demon, his resistance was amusement. It let him struggle, let him believe he could still reclaim himself, because despair tastes sweeter when it's earned. Kale learned that every battle was being fought on two fronts, one in the physical universe, and one within the prison of his consciousness. In the material world, he was a towering machine of annihilation, a walking fortress wrapped in demonic flesh. But within his mind, he was a man, chained, bound, and burning with fury against the entity that had stolen his soul. In that place, his mindscape looked like a broken cathedral. The walls were made of iron and ash, carved with the names of those he had slain. His own footsteps echoed like thunder as he wandered through it, seeking something he had long forgotten. And there, at the center of it all, sat the demon, a massive silhouette made of molten shadows and wings of smoke. Its voice was not heard, but felt. "You still dream of redemption," it said, its tone dripping with mockery. "You think the Emperor will forgive you. You think your soul still belongs to you." Kale didn't answer. He had learned that words gave the demon strength. Instead, he focused his rage, his memory, the smell of oil and incense, the warmth of his daughter's small hand in his. The demon snarled, sensing weakness. The air trembled as it pressed closer, its form shifting into something cruelly familiar, his own reflection, twisted and perfect, crowned in iron horns. "You are not Kale Voran anymore," the thing hissed. "You are Voran the Hollow. You are mine." But Kale's fury burned brighter than fear. "Then I will be your curse," he spat. "If I cannot be free, I will make your eternity suffer." The demon's laughter shook the void, and suddenly Kale's vision split. He was back in the real world, his massive night form standing atop a ruined world, oceans of blackened glass stretching beneath his feet. The corpses of chaos cultists littered the ground, their bodies twisted by his own weapons. The demon had slaughtered them through his hands, but Kale felt none of its pleasure. He felt only the crushing weight of guilt. That was the moment he realized something. The demon could control his body, but not his will. Not completely. Not yet. From that moment forward, Kale began to test the limits of his prison. When the demon slept, if such a creature ever truly slept, he tried to guide their steps away from warbands, away from slaughter. He found himself drifting toward the edges of the warp, to regions where reality shimmered thin, where the demonic influence was weaker. The demon stirred uneasily when they entered these places. It hated the quiet. It feared what lay beyond the reach of the gods. There, in the shifting storms of unreality, Kale began to hear something else, a new whisper. It was not of chaos, not of the Emperor, not of the warp. It was something older, something that called his name, not his title. A whisper that said, "Kale, you are not yet lost." For the first time in millennia, he felt hope. A fragile, burning hope that cut through the void like a shard of light. But in the eye of terror, hope is a dangerous thing. Because the gods always notice, and they always punish. The demon felt it. It always did. In their shared mind, emotions bled like open wounds. Hope was poison to the creature. It hissed within him, writhing in fury. "You dare dream." It spat, its voice rumbling like the cracking of stars. "You are mine. Every thought, every breath, every shred of your soul is mine." But Kale did not answer. He could not waste words on the damned. He saved his strength for the war that now raged within him. The first act of rebellion came in silence. The demon had chosen a world to burn, a hive world long lost to chaos, its skies filled with cultists chanting praises to their dark patrons. Kale's war engine landed like an executioner's blade, the ground shattering beneath his titanic feet. The cultists fell to their knees, weeping in ecstasy, believing their god had come to bless them. The demon roared for slaughter. It wanted blood, fire, and worship. But Kale resisted. He diverted power from the war engine's reactor, letting its weapons fall silent. The cannon that once screamed death now glowed faintly, dormant. The cultists looked up in confusion. And for a moment, through the haze of warp energy, Kale saw their faces, human faces. Broken, lost, deceived. People who had once been like him. The demon shrieked, "Kill them! They are ours!" Kale did not move. His will was like iron, his defiance an act of suicide, and salvation. That hesitation cost him dearly. The demon's rage struck like a storm. Fire filled his mind, and he felt his consciousness tear. He screamed without a voice, a sound that echoed through dimensions. The creature unleashed its fury, seizing control of his limbs. His massive iron hand rose against his will, the plasma cannon roaring to life once more. But this time, the demon didn't fire on the cultists. It turned the weapon inward. The Chaos Knight's own armor split open under the barrage, molten metal cascading like blood. Systems screamed warnings as the core went critical. Kale felt agony ripple through his fused nerves, pain that transcended flesh, burning straight into the soul. The demon wanted to make an example of him. "If you will not serve," it hissed, "then you will suffer." And suffer he did. Kale's body convulsed within the throne mechanism, blood mixing with coolant and oil. His mind shattered under the weight of the demon's fury. He saw visions, 1,000 realities collapsing, his own reflection breaking apart into fragments of memory. His house, his oath, his family, all of it burning in the fires of chaos. Yet even through that torment, he clung to one thought: "I am still Kale Voran." Those words became a weapon. A mantra, a defiance. Each repetition weakened the demon's hold, if only for a moment. He felt its confusion, its disbelief that a mortal could still fight after such agony. That disbelief turned to fear. And fear gave Kale strength. He forced the machine's systems to stabilize. The molten plates reformed, the reactor dimmed from overload, and the towering figure of the Chaos Knight stood again amid smoke and ruin. The cultists watched in awe, unable to understand what had just occurred. Inside, Kale whispered to the demon, "You can break my flesh, you can consume my soul, but you will never erase me." The demon did not reply. For the first time, it was silent. And in that silence, Kale felt the faintest flicker of something he hadn't known in millennia: victory. But he also knew this was only the beginning. The gods of chaos do not forgive rebellion. They do not tolerate hope. And soon, they would send something far worse than pain. They would send reminders, the kind that devour worlds just to make a point. Kale had challenged a demon. Now, he had invited the wrath of gods. The demon inside him trembled first, a shudder that rippled through every circuit and nerve. It went silent, as if afraid to draw attention. And that silence was worse than any scream. Kale could feel them, the four. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, their presence slithering through the warp, vast and unfathomable. They didn't speak with words, they didn't need to. Their attention alone was enough to tear sanity to ribbons. Kale realized too late what his defiance had done. His rebellion was not an act of courage, it was an insult. In a realm where every soul exists only to serve, defiance is the one thing the gods cannot allow to live. The air around him thickened, colors bleeding and twisting as the sky itself began to melt. The planet beneath his feet cracked open like glass, spewing rivers of warp fire. The cultists who had once worshipped him now writhed and screamed as their bodies dissolved into tendrils of chaos energy, reabsorbed into the will of their masters. Reality tore open above him, a rift of impossible light, and from it, they came. Not gods themselves, their servants. Their punishers. Warp entities of unspeakable form. Demons of Khorne, armored in burning brass, their axes dripping with hatred. Beings of Tzeentch, shifting through impossible colors, their laughter like the tearing of silk. Nurgle's children, bloated and joyous, spreading disease through the air itself. And the horrors of Slaanesh, elegant, terrible, whispering promises of surrender between screams. Kale felt their presence claw at his soul, urging him to kneel. The demon inside him wanted to. It begged him, "Bo, fool, beg for forgiveness before they unmake us both." But Kale stood firm. The ground shook beneath his feet, but he refused to bend. He was done kneeling. He raised his weapon, not out of hope, but out of spite. The first to strike was a bloodthirster, a living furnace of hate. It descended upon him with wings of molten iron, its chain axe roaring through the air. The impact was cataclysmic. Kale staggered, armor shattering, reactor screaming under strain. But he didn't fall. His ion shield flared to life, powered by nothing but fury and defiance. The duel raged like a storm. Sparks of warp fire and plasma tore the sky apart. For every wound Kale suffered, he dealt another. For every scream that echoed, he roared louder. The demon within him screamed too, but this time, it screamed with him. Its fury fused with his will, not in obedience, but in survival. Two beings, bound by hate, fighting against gods. It was not victory they sought, it was meaning. A statement to the void itself: we are still here. The battle ended when the bloodthirster fell, its colossal form dissolving into fire and ash. The other demons hesitated. None dared approach. In that hesitation, Kale turned his gaze to the heavens, toward the rift that burned with the gaze of the four. He did not speak, for there were no words to match his defiance. He simply stood, bleeding, broken, alive. The rift pulsed once, as if the gods had blinked. Then, slowly, it closed. Their attention withdrew. Their voices faded. But Kale knew it wasn't mercy. It was curiosity. The gods did not forgive him. They spared him, for now. Because in a universe built on endless war and worship, a soul that defies them is not an enemy. It is an experiment, a story worth watching. The demon spoke softly, trembling in disbelief. They let us live. Kale's voice was hollow, but steady. No, they're waiting. Above him, the stars twisted back into their places. The battlefield was silent again, save for the echo of a heart that refused to stop beating. He had survived their wrath. But survival in the warp is never victory. It's only the beginning of the next torment. For days, or maybe centuries, time has no meaning in the warp. Kale wandered through the remains of that ruined world. The air shimmered like broken glass, and the earth whispered in forgotten tongues. His war plate was cracked and scorched, his body inside it was little more than a skeleton suspended in fluid and pain. Yet he walked on, driven by something that wasn't strength. It was defiance turned habit. Even agony becomes routine when you've lived long enough inside it. Then he felt it. A pull. A calling. At first, he thought it was the demon again, its voice returning to torment him. But this was different. It didn't hiss. It didn't command. It invited. Like a song played backward through the void, familiar and wrong all at once. Kale followed the sound across plains of ash and rivers of frozen fire, until he reached a place that did not belong to the warp, or the materium. A wound in reality itself. There, rising from the cracked horizon, stood something that shouldn't have existed, a knight. Towering, motionless, ancient beyond measure. Its armor was black as a dying star, its heraldry long eroded by time. Around it, the ground was littered with bones, thousands of them, all kneeling. Kale felt the pull grow stronger. His reactor flared. His armor trembled, as though recognizing a brother long dead. He approached, and the air around the corpse machine shimmered with energy older than chaos itself. Symbols flickered along its plates, glyphs of loyalty, sacrifice, purity. Imperial sigils. It had once been loyal. But now it was something else. Something worse. Kale heard a whisper, soft and mournful, "We were the same, once." He froze. The voice wasn't the demon. It wasn't even his imagination. It came from the fallen knight. A soul still trapped within. A mirror of his own fate. "You fought the gods," the voice said, "and they watched. Now they have chosen to watch you longer." Kale stepped closer, his massive iron form casting a shadow over the corpse machine. "What did they want from me?" The voice sighed. It was the sound of rust and memory. "To see if you can break yourself better than they ever could." The ground split open. Energy surged up through the soil, warp lightning tearing reality apart. The corpse knight began to rise, its systems flaring with unnatural power. But this was no resurrection. This was transference. Kale felt his circuits overload, his nerves ignite, his reactor pulse like a heart about to burst. The gods, laughter rolled through the clouds. They weren't punishing him. They were remaking him. The Black Knight opened its hollow helm, revealing a core of pure warp energy. A vortex of souls screaming in silence. Kale tried to resist, but resistance was meaningless now. The gods had found entertainment in his rebellion, and amusement must always end in spectacle. The energy leapt toward him. His machine howled as systems fused and warped. Demonic sigils carved themselves into the metal. His armor stretched, reformed, reshaped into something monstrous and magnificent. Pain flooded every part of him, and through that pain, he felt something terrifyingly familiar, acceptance. He was being reborn, not as Kale Voran, not as Voran the Hollow, but as something new. When the light faded, the world was gone. The Black Knight stood empty once more. Kale's form now towered higher, his armor rippling with living flesh and metal. His reactor burned like an open wound in the warp. His voice, when it came, was both his and not his. "I am not yours," he whispered to the void. But the laughter that answered was warm. "You are ours forever, child." He had become what the gods desired most, a symbol. Not of power, not of faith, but of futility. A creature cursed to fight against his own chains, knowing they were forged from his own defiance. And somewhere deep within the iron labyrinth of his mind, the demon wept, because even it knew that this was a fate worse than servitude. He no longer knew how long he had been drifting through the warp. His body, a living fortress of iron and demonic sinew, moved without rest, guided by faint gravitational pulls that weren't physical at all. Every step echoed like thunder in a hollow cathedral. His mind, though fractured, still tried to make sense of the silence that followed the laughter of the gods. At first, he thought they had abandoned him. But abandonment would have been mercy. The truth came slowly. He wasn't forgotten, he was kept. Preserved like a specimen, his suffering catalogued, his rage recorded in the endless annals of chaos. Then came the dreams. They began as flickers, images of places that shouldn't exist. Battlefields soaked in the light of dying suns. Knights like him, other chaos titans, marching, chanting, killing. But there was something different about these visions. They felt directed. As if someone was showing him a map, a pattern hidden in the slaughter. The pattern spoke one word: convergence. When Kale awoke from those visions, he was no longer alone. A voice, neither his nor the demon's, whispered through the circuits of his machine. Soft, purposeful. "You are the spear." He tried to ignore it, but the voice persisted. "The gods will not speak again. They have moved beyond you. But their war continues, and you will lead it." Kale roared into the void, his voice tearing through dimensions. "I will not serve." But the warp itself rippled with cruel amusement. Across the endless expanse of unreality, other lights began to flare, other chaos knights, called from their slumber, answering an instinct they didn't understand. They came to him like moths to fire. Some were beasts beyond language, others, like Kale, still carried fragments of memory and sorrow. Together, they formed a fleet, a procession of nightmares marching through the storms of the Imperium. And at their center stood Kale Voran, the Hollow Reborn. He did not command them by choice. He did not lead them by will. The gods had turned his defiance into a banner, his rebellion into a creed. "If one soul can stand against us," they whispered, "let him be the one who spreads our war further than any who served willingly." That was their genius. They did not need obedience to win. They only needed pain. Each battle they fought in the material realm drew more into their orbit. Loyalists, heretics, it didn't matter. Every death fed the warp. Every scream sang praise to the gods. Kale saw entire star systems burn and realized, with mounting horror, that his struggle had become the engine of their glory. Every act of resistance made the gods stronger. There was no victory left, only motion. Only purpose. Inside him, the demon had grown quiet again. It no longer mocked or commanded. It watched. Perhaps it pitied him. Perhaps it had finally understood that the two of them were no longer master and prisoner, but mirrors, each the other's eternal reflection. Kale spoke to it, softly. "If this is purpose, I want none of it." The demon answered, almost gently, "Want has nothing to do with it. We are what we are. The gods made us instruments, and the universe will hear our song." Kale closed his eyes. For a moment, he imagined silence, true silence, free of the warp's noise, the gods' laughter, the machine's endless hum. But silence is a luxury of the dead. When he opened his eyes again, the fleet of Chaos Knights moved as one, marching toward another world, a world untouched, pure, unaware of the horror descending upon it. Kale felt the old ache of defiance rise once more. Not for redemption, not for victory, but simply to remember that he still could. He whispered a name, his daughter's, faint and trembling, and for that heartbeat, before the guns ignited and the sky burned, he was Kale Voran again. A man, a father, a soul that still remembered what it meant to fight. And then the cannons roared. It was not a fortress world, not a hive city swollen with corruption and decay. It was a green, living world, a place where the rivers still glimmered like molten glass and the people still sang hymns to the Emperor without fear. The Chaos Fleet loomed above it like a wound in the stars, and Kale felt that wound spreading through him too. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. The demon within felt it, and it laughed. Hesitation. It hissed. "You would deny what you have become." Kale didn't answer. His silence was its own rebellion. He stared down at the planet, this last untouched fragment of what humanity once was, and something deep inside him twisted. His memories, buried under centuries of metal and blood, clawed their way back. He remembered a village under a blue sky. He remembered his daughter's laughter. He remembered the promise he once made, to protect, not destroy. But the gods demand tribute, and mercy has no place in chaos. The first bombardment began before he could stop it. Orbiting warships rained fire upon the surface, tearing through continents. Cities that had stood for millennia vanished beneath oceans of flame. Kale screamed, not in defiance, not in command, but in pure agony. He could feel each soul as it was torn from the material world and fed to the warp. Every scream became part of him, echoing through his mind like a chorus of ghosts. The demon shuddered with ecstasy. Do you feel it? The harvest. This is what we are. Kale's fists clenched around the controls, denting steel that should have been unbreakable. He wanted to stop, but the chaos energy that animated him demanded more. His body obeyed even as his soul wept. Every movement, every step on the burning surface below, killed hundreds. His armor grew hotter, brighter, as if the fires of the planet itself were fusing with him. Then he heard it, the cry of a single voice, rising above the others. It wasn't a scream of terror. It was prayer. Through the scorched ruins of a cathedral, a lone figure stood, a priest, ancient and broken, holding aloft the aquila. His robes burned, his flesh charred, yet his voice did not falter. The Emperor protects, he shouted, as the ground shook and the air turned to ash. The Emperor protects. Something snapped in Kale. For the first time since his damnation, he felt fear, not of death, but of what that voice meant. The man's faith should have been meaningless here, in the presence of a godless monster. But it hurt. It burned through the psychic link that bound Kale to the warp, searing the demonic whispers into silence. For a brief, impossible instant, he heard nothing. No chaos, no gods, only the priest's voice and the pounding of his own heart. Kale fell to one knee. The demon roared, fighting to regain control. Fool, you would kneel before a corpse god's servant. You would deny eternity for a single man's prayer. Kale's voice was a whisper, broken but certain. I was a man before I was your weapon. And a man can still choose. He reached down through the layers of code, corruption, and madness that controlled his machine. Deep within the knight's core, he found what remained of his own will, a flicker of the human soul that chaos had not extinguished. He gripped it like a dying star. And then, he turned his weapons skyward. The fleet above didn't understand at first. Chaos ships continued their bombardment, oblivious. But when Kale's first shot tore through the flagship of his own legion, ripping the soul of a demon prince from its hull, the warp itself screamed. He fired again, and again, each blast a defiance against everything the gods had built through him. The demon inside howled in despair. You cannot kill them. You are bound to us. Kale's reply was cold, almost peaceful. Then I will die with you. Around him, the Chaos Knights began to falter. Some turned their weapons on each other, corrupted systems breaking as Kale's act of rebellion rippled through the psychic link that bound them all. The sky became a storm of fire and madness. Entire war machines detonated, consumed by their own betrayal. For a fleeting moment, Kale stood at the center of it all, a lone titan defying gods. His machine burned, its armor cracking, its limbs failing. But inside that dying metal shell, Kale felt something like freedom. He looked down one last time at the priest, who had fallen to his knees but was still alive. The man gazed up at the collapsing giant and whispered a final benediction. Go in peace, warrior. The Emperor remembers. Kale smiled. For the first time in centuries, he smiled. As his reactor overloaded, the light consumed him, neither the crimson glow of chaos nor the cold gold of the Imperium, but something pure, something between. And in that brief, blinding instant, Kale Voran was human again. The detonation of Kale's reactor had been unlike any other. It was not a simple explosion of metal and fire, it was a psychic scream that tore through the fabric of reality. Across the Eye of Terror, other Chaos Knights faltered. Demon lords paused mid-assault, sensing the shockwave of a will so potent it had defied the gods themselves. And somewhere, far beyond, the gods themselves, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, felt a ripple through the oceans of their power. They had underestimated the man who once was Kale Voran. The vessel, the demon, the titan, their plaything, had become a thorn. One fleeting, blazing moment of human defiance had reminded them that even in a universe ruled by war and worship, a soul could still resist. The warp screamed in fury. Storms of black fire and blood tore through the corridors of reality. Entire planets shook as the psychic echo of Kale's final act washed over them. Cultists fell to their knees in terror, screaming as their master's whispers became distorted, filled with uncertainty. The demon inside Kale, the one that had tormented him for millennia, was gone, consumed by the overload. Its absence left a silence so profound that it terrified even the warp. And yet, even in death, Kale had not truly vanished. A fragment of him lingered, a ghost in the machine, a remnant of the man who had chosen defiance over eternity. This fragment did not speak. It did not act, but it waited. Hidden in the chaos of the warp, it pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder that no matter how tightly the gods sought to bind souls, the human spirit could never be fully extinguished. For the gods, the lesson was bitter. Power without vigilance can be challenged, even mocked, and the smallest ember of free will can set a storm in motion. For mortals who dared whisper Kale's name, the story became legend. Tales spread of a chaos knight who had turned against his masters, of a man-machine who had reminded the universe that even in the darkest corners of eternity, choice and defiance still mattered. But there was a warning beneath the legend. The gods do not forgive defiance. They do not forget. The Eye of Terror remained a place of terror, of wrath, of whispers promising that nothing truly dies in their domain. Kale's fragment would linger, yes, but so too would the ever-watchful eyes of chaos. Every time a mortal dared to hope, a shadow of Kale's defiance would flicker, and somewhere, the gods would notice. And so, the universe turned. Wars continued. Stars died. Nights rose. And fell. But the story of Kale Voran, the Chaos Knight who defied the gods, became an echo in the warp, a haunting, eternal reminder that even in a realm ruled by corruption and madness, humanity's spark could still burn. For the listener, the question remains, if a single soul can defy gods and demons alike, how far could you go if you chose to resist? The universe had moved on. Worlds rose and fell, the Imperium continued its endless crusade, unaware that one of its greatest enemies had once been a man. The Chaos fleets rebuilt, their demons murmuring in fear and awe of the ghostly ripple Kale had left behind. His final act, the refusal to bow, the defiance that shattered both demon and knight, became legend whispered in the warp itself. But Kale's story did not end with legend. Within the fractured shell of his war machine, fragments of him remained. His mind, fused eternally with the demon's essence, wandered the void between worlds, a living testament to what it means to resist. He could feel every pulse of warp energy, every shadow of corruption, every echo of a god's gaze, but he remained unbroken. For even in fragments, a spark of humanity endured. Centuries passed, or perhaps mere moments, for time is meaningless in such a place, and Kale observed. He saw civilizations rise and crumble, heretics flourish and be destroyed, gods wage their endless wars, and mortals cling stubbornly to hope. Each event, each flicker of courage or defiance, resonated with him. And though he could not intervene as he once had, he remembered. He felt the weight of grief, the fire of rage, the bitter sweetness of mercy withheld and justice denied. In that suspended eternity, Kale realized the cruelest truth of all: the gods had never truly imprisoned him. They had created a paradox. A soul that could not be broken, yet could never fully act. A living warning to both mortals and demons alike. And yet, he was free in the one way that mattered. Free in mind, if not in body. Free in will, if not in flesh. Free in spirit, if not in the war machine that had consumed him. He was a ghost in a universe of violence, a sentinel in the void, an eternal reminder that no matter how tightly the chains of fate may bind a being, there is always room for defiance. Kale's laughter, faint and hollow, echoed through the warp, not joyous, not triumphant, but real. A sound that chilled the immortal ears of gods and demons alike. It was the laughter of a man who had lived, suffered, and resisted, and would continue to do so until the universe itself unraveled. And so, in the endless expanse of war, corruption, and madness, Kael Vorin endures. Not as a hero, not as a god, not as a villain, but as a warning. A whisper in the dark. A spark of defiance in a universe that demands obedience. For eternity has many forms. Some are prisons, some are blessings. Kael's is both, and in that, there is a story the universe will never forget.